The Midnight Selkie, Chapter 4. The bus came to a halt, bringing up the scent of brakes and exhaust. Once to a full stop, the door opened, releasing a spurt of young students to be freed from a day of tedious lessons. They cheered, hoot and hollered as they sauntered from the bus and into the street. Raleigh did not saunter. He was the last one off at this particular stop. He was about dragging his feet as he trudged from one environment to the next. He stared down at the asphalt, refusing to chance any eye contact with any of his schoolmates. He wasn't interested in their antics. He still had his own things to worry about. If he could get home quickly, he'd be able to quickly finish his homework. After that, he would have ample time to read, or perhaps help out at the tavern. It was easy. Being so reserved, few students wanted to waste their time on him. So after several lonely and silent minutes, Raleigh reached the fence surrounding his yard. He tossed his backpack into the yard and lifted the latch at the gate, letting himself in. He scooped up the bag once the gate was closed behind him, brooding as he made his way up the walkway. He moped like this often when it came to school. He just couldn't help it. With one good sling, he tossed the backpack onto the porch without a glance. "Bad day?" Malcolm asked with a chuckle. "Same as always," Raleigh replied. "I'm just glad to be home." "You done for the day?" "Why? Do we have plans?" "That depends," Malcolm replied. "Do you have a lot of homework?" "With the grades I make, it's nothing that can't wait," Raleigh shrugged. Malcolm held out an arm and beckoned for Raleigh to come closer. "Come on, let's get a bite to eat. I brought home a pizza." Raleigh guzzled his soda and let out a loud belch. After all, he was like the other children in some ways. He was easily pleased by pizza. In reality, it was one of the many takeaway foods that his father utilized when Kiana worked evenings. Malcolm wasn't very good in the kitchen, and he wasn't very good at washing dishes. Paper plates and pre-made food was a winner in his book. "I talked to your therapist today." Raleigh paused, staring hard at his father. His father. Talked to Dr. Salem. It was odd. Malcolm thought very little of psychology and psychiatrists. Though he had no qualms with Dr. Salem as an individual person. Everyone had a right to make a living, after all. But it was completely out of character for them to associate with one another. "You did?" "Yep. I wasn't sure if I should go through with my surprise, so I had to clear it with him. It is one thing if your mother fusses at me, but I don't want to hear her and a doctor whining at me. It's an unfair battle, 2 against 1, you know?" "A surprise? For me?" "Why do you sound so shocked?" Raleigh tried to find some justification. Nothing came that didn't sound rude or obnoxious. "You did what I asked you to do," Malcolm explained. "A proper gentleman keeps his word. If you say you'll do something, then do it. It allows others to take you seriously and find you credible and reliable." "So you really do have a reward for me?" Malcolm gave a little nod. "I wanted to head out after dinner. You'll need to digest some, which the drive will be good for." "It's not a pool, is it?" Raleigh asked. "A wading pool is one thing, but—" "Don't go making excuses and jumping to conclusions," Malcolm scolded gently. "Just stay quiet and keep an open mind." "An open mind? Dad, is that you?" "Don't forget your swimming trunks," he replied, getting up to clean the kitchen of its paper mess. Malcolm had devoted very little time into his son. He was a bit of a workaholic and provided well, but very little father-son time had been invested in their relationship. So it was rather understandable for both father and son to feel a bit awkward during the drive. There was no one to fuel or carry a conversation for them, so the drive remained tainted with an uncomfortable silence. Raleigh kept to fidgeting and looked out the window. The world outside was not completely alien to him, but it wasn't that familiar. This was a direction he had never traveled before, and never had a need to travel. It brought about a sense of nervousness and excitement within him. It was like an adventure of some kind. He was fueled by that natural curiosity of youth. Perhaps that was in his favor. It was that elasticity that his therapist counted on to heal a scar on his psyche. The car pulled into a complex, pulling Raleigh from his thoughts. He had never seen this big building before. His mouth dropped open as the reflection towered and crept along the vehicle. Whoa! What is this place? Malcolm put the car in park and smiled at his son. This place is where I work, Raleigh. This is the lab? This is it, he affirmed. You've never brought me to your work before. I didn't even think kids were allowed in. Well, you're here now. Normally, we're very careful about who goes in and comes out. He was pleased to see a rise in excitement in Raleigh. I was able to make some arrangements. Out he got, in which Raleigh followed suit. He followed like an obedient little puppy, staying quiet and watching his surroundings in utter amazement. There were countless rooms and offices within. No office was complete without a fish tank of some sort. Some had simple bowls with betta, Siamese fighting fish, or a goldfish. Others had elaborate saltwater tanks. Most of the facility was vacant now, having called it a day. The night lot was made up of a skeleton crew. It was just enough to be productive. A dog rushed from around the corner, halting with a skid before them, and began to bark wildly. Raleigh became startled, instinctually grabbing onto his father's arm. What was such an ugly dog doing in a marine biology lab? Abby! Came a frantic call. From around the same corner rushed a young man in glasses and a lab coat. He grabbed the dog's collar and held her back. I'm sorry, she doesn't bite. Bringing a taste of home to work with you, Dr. Connor? Malcolm asked. Sense of security, Dr. Stock, he replied. She also has a bit of a positive effect on the marine animals. I see, he chuckled. Anyway, this is my son Raleigh. Pleasure, Dr. Connor smiled, reaching out and cheerfully shaking Raleigh's hand. I am Dr. Benjamin Connor. Just call me Ben. The dog let out a little bark and sat on her haunches. And this is Abby. Raleigh forced a polite smile, looking the dog over. She was of a medium size. She was a black dog with very tight and coarse curls. Her back half was shaved, almost giving her a mane-like top half. Is she a poodle of some kind? Dear boy, no! Ben laughed. She is a champion! Abby is a Portuguese water dog. She's a very good worker and a good friend. Abby panted happily, allowing, if not demanding, that Raleigh and Ben pet her. She's real nice. Ben gave him a cheerful nod. He then turned his attention to Malcolm. Did you forget something, Dr. Stock? I'm scheduled for an appointment in room D. I think Raleigh might enjoy it. What's in room D? Raleigh asked. Ben was bold enough to reach over and mess the boy's hair. He seemed to be a rather good-natured sort of fellow. Why don't you follow me, boy? I'll show you. Raleigh gave a nod and came alongside Ben as he turned to walk deeper into the lab complex. Abby trotted ahead, knowing her way, turning to bark for those silly humans to hurry. Nothing would ever get accomplished if they remained so slow. Finally, Ben reached the door and slid a card key through a slot. He then punched in a number code. Afterwards, the door let out a click and a hiss as it opened for them, bidding them to enter. The lights in the room were off, but it was not dark. The room was tainted in luminescence of blue-green. The center of the room was a large in-ground pool. Otherwise, the floors were clear, and equipment lined the walls. Abby galloped forward and crouched at the pool's edge, growling and letting out quiet, breathy barks. Don't tease them, girl, Ben chortled. They'll splash you again. They? Raleigh inquired, peering up at Ben curiously. They, he whispered, leading Raleigh closer. He hesitated a moment, wondering if Ben would be so cruel as to push him into the pool. Carefully he knelt down and he peered into the water, trying to decipher what this "they" was that Ben was talking about. Up came a splash, jolting Raleigh back with a start, making him fall back onto his bottom. "Dolphins!" he cried out. Ebby tapped her forepaws and barked with excitement. The dolphin let out a little squeal, gaping its mouth open in what seemed like a large grin. "This pool contains 4 dolphins, 2 males and 2 females. This one is one of our females, Mimi. She's the most curious of the lot. She and Ebby have been known to do the girl talk thing." To that, Raleigh glanced over to Ben. The man had been speaking with his hands, a very visual sort of speaker. He finally had to let out a laugh, as Ben had looked frozen in suspended animation, awaiting a response of some sort. "I've never seen dolphins this close before. You can touch her if you like. They're all very friendly. The cloudy one watching from the other corner is our second female, Jeannie. The smoky one is our younger male, Jojo. And the one with the scar on his head is Sam. Different types of dolphins. They're very good for the research we're doing with them." "Research?" Raleigh asked with a frown. The images in his mind were not those of a pretty sort. Normally, the television was notorious for showing animals in labs as cruelly treated, tortured, and then disposed of or mutated. Ben jumped with a start and waved his hands wildly, realizing perhaps the images that came to mind. No. It's nothing like nasty probes and evil electrodes. We don't do those sorts of experiments here." "Oh." "They're very playful, but most dolphins are. Why don't you hop in?" "No!" Raleigh gasped. "I'm afraid of the water. I can't just go from a foot of water to this deep tank." He stood tall, tense, virtually petrified. "Calm down, Raleigh," Ben chuckled, holding up his hands defensively. "It's all right. Just sit on the edge there. Put your feet in. No one's going to make you do anything you're uncomfortable with." Raleigh studied Ben a long moment and contemplated heavily upon him and his words. He finally decided that Ben was indeed trustworthy. He sat himself back down and removed his shoes, setting them aside and scooting himself closer to the edge of the pool. Slowly, he sank his feet in. The water was slightly cooler than room temperature, but still rather pleasant. Beside him, Ebby rested herself down, obviously growing eager. Mimi came closer as well, rubbing against his legs. He couldn't help but let out a giggle. Her skin felt so strange against his legs. And within moments, the other 3 dolphins began to investigate this newcomer. This was it. This was the big surprise that his father had planned for him. Rewarded for his courage, he got to interact with some of the most beautiful animals in the sea, and in the safety of this room. It was a nice and almost liberating experience. Sure, he wasn't comfortable enough to get in and swim with them, but it was nice to be close to them. The dolphins didn't judge him. They were as friendly as they perhaps would have been had he slid all the way in. They were happy just being close to him, chattering at him and being touched by him. They didn't see some loser. They didn't see a frightened little boy. They saw another living creature and wanted to, despite their differences, get to know him. It was a wonderful feeling. He knew that it would be something that he'd cherish from that moment on. It was a step towards his freedom, his escape from his phobia.